Welcome back to Coach2Scale, where we break down what it really takes to build sales teams that crush it in the real world. Today, we're diving into the mind of senior sales leader Ed Diller, a man who doesn't just talk about scaling, he lives it. And Ed's got some spicy truths for us and some hard takes on what he says you can't teach in sales. And we'll also hear how Ed's bartending days taught him this gem. It's easier to make a good night great than a bad night good, and why that's true for sales teams too. Buckle up. This one's about mindset, risk, and finding the edge that sets great sellers apart. Let's dive in. Oh yeah, while you're at it, engage with us on social media. Hit the like button on LinkedIn. Subscribe and comment on YouTube. Let's go. Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Bonelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by Coachum, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started. Excited for today's guest. He started his sales career in the advertising business in the 90s. He's had a string of senior sales leadership positions in enterprise software, holding CRO roles at Cyberite, Zevo, and Castbox. Currently, he's senior sales leader at New Relic. He's also a new pickleball enthusiast, is what I picked up on LinkedIn. Ed Diller, welcome to Coach2Scale.
Thank you, Matt. It's good to be here. And I don't know why I had to throw in the year of the 90s here. I'm hoping to be younger than I am, but I appreciate it.
Well, I started my sales career in the 90s also, and somehow I have gray hair and you don't. So we'll jump right into it. Ed, because we both started not yesterday, a hot minute and then some ago, you've heard a lot of myths in this crazy business. What's a myth about coaching, leading salespeople, sales leaders that you heard time and time again, but you believe that myth is either misguided or maybe even complete BS?
Yeah, good question. I think there are certain sales mantras that have become standard fare, right? And one of those that I would take very seriously that is not always the best advice is this idea of go higher in an organization, meaning whatever level you're talking to about getting a deal done, there is their boss, their boss's boss, somebody else you should also be connected to. And that doesn't mean you want to exclude them from the process. What it means in the way I'm thinking about it is you have to be invited along with that decision maker you're talking to have that bigger conversation. I've seen this time and time again where somebody's talking to somebody who's been tasked with the responsibility to do a certain deal. And it's almost like they're being dismissed by saying, well, maybe I should really talk to your boss. Like who's the real decision maker here, right? And so you alienate those people who are designed to be there on your side. So it's not that we don't want to speak to those higher levels in an organization. It's that we just have to do it intentionally and being considerate of the people that we're dealing with directly.
Yeah, there's all the different processes like MEDDIC or BANT, and let's just use MEDDIC for example. Are you the economic buyer, Ed? It's all very much how it's done, but also what I think I hear you saying is you have to earn the right, and because it's intentional, you want to bring that person along. You might need to expand, but can you talk a little bit about like how we earn the right and what's an example of earning the right versus not earning the right?
Yeah, I mean, the visual I like to give to my sales teams is that imagine that the person you're talking to, you want to be on the same side of the table as they are. The minute you have this sort of adversarial relationship where sales has a natural ability to be, right? We want something from them. They don't want to give it. There's this natural push-pull there. But if you can align yourself to think about this just, visually, metaphorically as I'm on the same side of the table. How can we together get this done? How can we together go to your boss or whomever and make this pitch so that it makes the most sense, right? If this sounds good to you, I know there's a bunch of nuances on our side. I'm happy to help explain that as we take this to the next level. Right. And it's the idea that we're not trying to exclude them from the process, but just make sure that we are invited in and that it feels very comfortable and natural versus adversarial to get to that next step.
Yeah. And how do you coach that? Is that when you think about coaching and leading salespeople, is there a framework, whether loosely or more defined? Is there a framework that you use to get points like this across?
I mean, sales is part nature, part nurture, I think.
Right.
And I always say that I used to say there are four things I can't teach. And I've since over the years added a fifth, but I can't teach these four things. I can't teach someone to be smart. I can't teach someone to be creative. I can't teach someone to have a good work ethic, and I can't teach someone to be personable, right? Those are things that and the fifth one I've added over the years is I also found I can't teach someone to be positive. And you need those five characteristics. And I think if you have that, you naturally find these conversations to be a little bit easier because you're working with a tool set that allows you to have those more comfortable conversations and even more difficult conversations, right? Because people like you. If you're well liked, everything is easier, right? And people like smart, creative, hardworking people. So it's it all flows together.
Yeah, I remember one of my kids' basketball coaches said, "You can't coach height. There's two things you can't coach. You can't coach height, and you can't coach dumb."
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, he was being pithy when he said it. So, Ed, speaking of some of these sayings, like we're talking about here, there's a lot of platitudes in the business that, on the surface, are really captain obvious statements, but when really studied and put into practice, they can yield powerful results. And I know you and I have had a conversation about platitudes and really the desire and the need to go deeper. What's one of those platitudes you truly believe in, where on the surface it's like, yeah, no kidding, but really is worth some introspection?
I think this whole idea of finding ways to create win-win scenarios, right? That is something that we all talk about, and how do we create this mutual value proposition that we're going toward? And I think that if you really truly aren't doing that, then you aren't really progressing your business forward.
Mm.
And I think the way to do that, again, goes back to how are we being creative? How are we really seeking to understand the goals that they have, whatever client? I mean, one thing that I like to talk about in terms of all sales processes is to remember that I don't care what you're selling. If you're selling widgets, if you're selling ad space, if you're selling observability software, is to remember you aren't selling minutes, airtime, banner ads, data, ingestion, right? That's not what you're selling. What you're selling ultimately are business outcomes. And if you can deliver against those in whatever capacity your sales career takes you, then you're going to be creating win-win scenarios, right? They know what they're buying. I'm buying a result. And whatever that result is that you have mapped and scoped and made sure you can deliver against, that's what I think creates those win-wins.
Yeah, and so true, and that's why that mindset that you're not selling product, you're not selling widgets, you're selling outcomes. That's why isn't sales transferable? Aren't these skills transferable to, you're in this position right now selling X, but if you were thwarted into some other position selling something totally different, it's the same mindset, right?
100%. And in my career, I've moved around a little bit. I've sold advertising and then moved into podcasting and then into enterprise technology, both on, specifically to automotive and then to general enterprise. So along the way, it's, sales is very transferable. And I still remember one of the first sales books I ever read. Boy, this was a long time ago. But it was called The 1 Minute Salesperson. If you guys haven't read it, go back to that. It'll take you about 15 minutes to read it, right? It's not a long book. But it talks about every job that you ever hold is a sales job. I don't care if you're a dentist, right? Somewhere you're selling that your services to prospective patients. And that becomes, and even if you're just selling the expertise, when you recommend, a root canal, do they trust you? Is that something that's a sales job? And everything you have is a sales job. So are they transferable? Yes. I think every sales skill is transferable to just about anything.
Yeah, I often tell this story about a friend of mine who he messed up his Achilles, And he walks into the specialist in Boston who's supposed to be the Achilles doctor. And the doctor looked at him for like half a second and said, "Oh, yeah, that's you need surgery. You're going to be laid up for 6 months. It's tough rehab. That really sucks." And he's like, "Hey, doc, nice to meet you. How about hello?"
Right.
Um, and so, long story short, he did need Achilles surgery. He was laid up for 6 months, but he didn't get the surgery from the best doctor in Boston. He went and got a second opinion for someone who showed some small amount of empathy and bedside manner. And it's like, it doesn't take a lot.
100% agree. Right. I mean, every job, doesn't matter what you're doing, you're either selling your ideas, something is being sold.
So, Ed, you made me think of something because you've had a great career and you've done different things. And we've had a couple of guests on over the past, month or so who've talked about the fact that your career doesn't need to be climbing the corporate ladder. It could be a zigzag and not a straight line. And I think it's a good question to ask you. How has your different roles and different perspectives in different industries helped you do what you're doing today in enterprise tech?
Yeah. I mean, the world has clearly changed, right? And it's changed in a lot of ways where I used to work at the Wall Street Journal. And when people say, "Hey, how long have you been here?" I would sheepishly have to say, "It's only been 10 years, right?" Because everybody I'm talking to has been there 25. And that was something that is a big shift into today's world, where most people, if you're staying at a particular place for 3, 4, 5 years, that tends to be a pretty good long run, especially if you talk about technology companies. And so, because of that, career trajectories are a little bit different in that people tend to move out to move up. And that's actually one of the things that I really hope changes over time, that people can better identify and grow careers at one company. um, but yeah, I think that's been the way. The zigzagging you're talking about is really created by the lack of most companies having great sort of programs to help mentor and develop their talent. Um, and so you get to a certain place and you got to get traded to a new team to go play the position you want.
Well, and that's part of the size of the company that you're in too, not just the industry. I mean, the Wall Street Journal sounds like it's this huge company. I don't really actually know how big it is, um, but if you were at, one of the bigger companies, pick your vertical, pick your huge company that everyone knows about. It's easier to move up. If you're at a startup, and that company's not growing as fast as you need to, you might run into some issues. But it
True.
there is also different groups within. It doesn't have to be all, let's say, sales. You can go into marketing, you can go into customer success, you can go into finance and corporate development and get skills that will help you ultimately be a better sales leader, for example. Would you agree with that?
I would. And going back to the platitudes of things that are said, many people believe that salespeople at their core are what people say are coin operated, right? Money motivated. It's all about the money. What are you going to do for me? But I think the best salespeople, while money is certainly an important factor, they're achievement oriented. And so great salespeople don't just want a bigger paycheck for selling more. They want to take on more. They want to do more, right? I mean, then that's a key component for many of them. Even in small companies, I think it's important to drive that career path and say, whatever you're doing today, there's going to be opportunity to take on more.
So, Ed, I think that's a really good segue, in terms of talking about what life is like in this post-COVID world. Ed, I know you and I have had a conversation a while back on this, and I thought you had a really interesting point of view. In your, in your, as you look at things, how has the sales profession changed? PC post-COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's there's a lot of ways it's changed, but one is just, I think, where people are working. I think is a massive change. Obviously, that many roles are hybrid now or fully remote. Um, and it's changed sort of the dynamic of how people work, because in the past, pre-COVID, if you were going to work from home for a day and wait for the cable guy, you truly were working from home. Whereas now things have transitioned to people live at work. And that is a subtle, but I think very, very important shift because the boundaries between when you are on and when you are off have become very blurred. The expectation of both clients and internal uh, peers, reports, and those to whom you report uh, is the expectation that you're always available. And it becomes something that, work-life balance companies have strived to address for many, many years. And I think it's blurring the line now of, I find myself sometimes trapped at my desk where I feel like I can't go and get lunch, even though I'm, working remotely. And those are the kinds of things that happen, and it happens to everybody. But that's a big shift, I think, from office culture to hybrid/remote culture.
And is there what's the downside of that? And I think that's where you're going. Like people don't work from home, they live at work. I think it's a powerful statement. So there's a whole bunch of good things that could come from that. But what they maybe touch on what's one of the not so good things that comes from that, both from the employee perspective, but also the employer perspective.
I mean, burnout is the number one thing that I point to, and that we again back to platitudes. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But when you are doing this stuff, it feels like you're sprinting all the time, and that's something that I think is detrimental to the employee long term. But it's also detrimental to the business if they're not keeping their great employees, right? You think of this from a workout perspective, and you're running hard on the treadmill and your workout isn't done, but you're tired. You go to do something else, and maybe now you're lifting weights, you're still tired. You're just changing, your sprint mentality is something else. So you don't want these people to be tired of the sprint they're doing at your company. No, they still need to sprint and just change to something else. Now that's how you end up losing really great people, because they're staying in that sprint mentality, but they're not doing it at your company any longer because they're worn out. So um, you know, longevity is one of those things I think that's at risk when people are sprinting for too long. And finally, the isolation that comes from not knowing people as well as you used to, right?
But and that's not good for either the employee. None of what we're talking about here is good for the employee or the employer.
Correct. I mean, again, employers don't want to keep turning over people. It's expensive. It's difficult. The challenges are numerous to get the right people on board and keep them on board.
What have you picked up? Like, so you could maybe have picked this up from someone else. You saw someone else do it. You developed it yourself. It doesn't matter. But what is something in this working more remotely, living at work type of thing where as a leader, you've figured out different ways to keep engagement levels high and motivate your people that you maybe didn't think of a couple of years ago?
So when I've done different remote work, I'll tell you, a lot of it has to do with company culture. But in one company culture I worked, the majority of conversation was done via telephone. And when we needed to talk to somebody, we'd call them. That was the culture. And here, for instance, at New Relic, it's much more about Zoom communication. And so, hey, let's jump on a quick Zoom. And I think that's really been beneficial to have that additional face time, even if it's virtual. That it makes a difference to know somebody is engaged. You can see them looking at you. You can tell body language. So you lose a little less of the impersonal communication, at least when you're on screen together. So um, making that a part of your corporate culture, I think is critical.
Yeah, a guest on not too long ago, she talked about, when everyone was in the office, it was easy to go up to someone who did a totally different role. So go up to someone in development, and say, "Hey, I noticed you do something totally different. You're building it. I'm selling it. Hey, come on, grab a cup of coffee." And they talked about how that's difficult to do in a Zoom world. But do you see people reaching out like, "Hey," instead of picking up the phone, or maybe they pick up the phone or send an email, "Hey, can we hop on a Zoom call? What you do sounds pretty cool. We work at the same company. Hey, can we spend, 20 minutes getting to know each other over Zoom. Do you see that happening more and more? Is that mainstream yet?
I wouldn't say it's mainstream. I think it's a terrific practice to implement. I think I think executing it is very, very difficult, just given how busy people are. Um, it's hard to schedule. I mean, look, here's one of the challenges, right? Zoom meetings, if you schedule them, their default is at minimum 30 minutes. And what you're talking about sometimes is a 5-minute conversation of, hey, what's going on? And how are you? Oh, you like football? I like football too. Like, what's going on? Like that might be the conversation you have. It's difficult to schedule a meeting to have that. So I don't know that we've completely solved how to do it. Um, but I think what helps are when you have group meetings where at least you can have a little bit of FaceTime with somebody. You can hear and see the banter that might happen for the 5 minutes that the call is sort of opening up. And you just get a sense of a personality. And I think that's very helpful when you have an ask or a question or they do, that there's some humanity that's transferred there.
Yeah. You know, I was just thinking about something that we talked about before, and it goes back to the platitudes. And one of them was, don't be afraid to lose, be excited to win. And I thought, I remember writing that down when you talked about it. Like, don't be afraid to lose, be excited to win. Can you talk about what that means in your world?
Yeah. I mean, you're never going to have great success without some big risks. And to take risks means you are risking something. Otherwise, it's not a risk. And um, what I think that means is that um, as you're approaching different challenges, your mission again is to solve whatever is in within your power to solve, right? Whatever is the limit of that. What is it that you're attempting to do? And sometimes that might mean asking for a lot more than you have. It might mean 10xing a particular deal, which is it's difficult in any situation. So there's no magic bullet here that, oh, you just do this and all of a sudden you 10x. But I think taking a step into that larger conversation is a risk because you could also just get pushed out. Ah, it's too much. We're not doing that. In fact, we're just going to replace everything that we had. Oh, I just lost my small part that I had. But if you're not willing to do that and not willing to step into that, you'll never realize those larger gains. So, um, yeah, it's a challenge for sure.
Well, the example that you give, right? I'll call it order taking, right? The customer calls up and says, "I want to buy more of this stuff that I already have. I need a few more seats. I need some more licenses, whatever." And the salesperson could say, "Wow, great! You know, it's a short month here, Thanksgiving in the U.S. Let me just take this thing down." Or they could say, "Hey, I know this thing's been working great for you. In the past we've talked about X, Y, or Z. We have this new functionality, whatever it is," and they try to position something bigger. Or, there's different ways people license it. You can license it by the named user, but you could also do an enterprise agreement. Is that something that you'd be interested in talking about, right? Whatever it is, the reason why a lot of people don't do that is they're afraid, like you said, they're going to lose the bird in the hand. In your experience, do how often is the bird in the hand lost when someone tries to position something more strategic and bigger?
It's not often, but this goes back to sort of the way we opened the conversation in terms of this is where it's critical that you are talking to people at the right level, right? So what I mean when I say you're not talking, you're not going to get somebody who runs a division of a company to sign something that incorporates the entire company. That doesn't track, right? But the question is, how can we get invited to that larger conversation if we're going to ask for something that's outside their purview? So yes, that's where you run the risk of, oh, this is just getting too complicated. I'll buy something that's easier to do, right? Complexity is one of the challenges that is faced. And as you go up levels, as you increase deal sizes, as you include more things, the time horizon on closing that deal gets longer and longer. It's the nature of the beast for the most part. And so it's critical that you know at what level you're talking to and potentially put placeholders in as you're building to that larger conversation. So, yeah, I think it's important that you don't normally lose what you have in front of you unless you've made things so complicated that they are just going to go with, this is just getting too crazy. I'm going to do something simpler. And then it's hard to unwind it all. So,
Yeah. Yeah. People crawl into a shell when things start to get complicated and hairy.
right. And especially if they're thinking, it's hard enough for me to get this one division. We have 9 divisions of our company. How am I possibly going to wrangle all these cats and get a master agreement done? You're talking about months and months and months. I don't want to do that. And so, yeah, again, it goes back to how do you put placeholders in place, get invited into larger conversations, and then move forward that way.
Yeah, I start laughing because whenever I end up talking to somebody about what happens when things get complicated. I remember this was probably 15, 20 years ago at this point. I remember I had to go buy a remote control. And at the time I was like 40 years on this earth and had never bought a remote control. It always just was there. It came with whatever it was. Like I never had to go buy one. And so all of a sudden, like, where do I go buy one? Oh, someone says, oh, Best Buy or whatever. I walk in, I'm like, I don't know what it costs, but I'm thinking in my head, it's probably 30, 40 bucks. And like, next thing you know, this guy's talking to me about like $200 remote control and it does this and that. And I'm like, and I left and my wife's like, did you get the remote control? I'm like, no, I didn't know what he was talking about. I just left. I forget it. We'll figure it out. Buy a new TV with one, Yeah, yeah, get me out of here. Oh yeah, I'm the last person that needs to be in the store trying to buy something like that. Ed, what's a painful lesson that you've learned in this crazy business that you're willing to share?
I learned this actually when I was in college. I was a bartender, just putting myself through college, and a manager at the time said something that actually turned out to be genius, and I've sort of played that through my career, and I'll tell you how this plays. But one of the things that this manager recognized is that when you have a bar business, it's far easier to make a good night great than it is to make a bad night good. Meaning, if Thursday night is your bar night and you're usually very busy and you run some special promotion, you're going to be busting at the seams. It's going to be incredible. If Tuesday you guys are a ghost town and you're like, oh, we're going to do something special on Tuesday, you're going to be a ghost town plus one person, right? It's much easier to make a good night great than it is to make a bad night good. And when you apply that to business and you say, hey, there are things in our company that we do exceptionally well. There are things we don't do as well, but we'd really like to improve those things. So let's really focus on getting those things up to par and really making a play for those things. And it can happen with people as well. This person's not as successful. Let's really invest a lot of time to making them more successful. What I have found the most painful lesson is you get much more by focusing on your success, on the things you do incredibly well, on the people that are your A players. Invest in those, invest in your A products. And sometimes you gotta let the C players, the C products, the C things go. And that's been, the painful lesson.
Mm. Well, that's actually an excellent story. Thanks for sharing that. So let's pivot a little bit. You're at New Relic now. For those who don't know, can you talk a little bit about what New Relic does, and then what attracted you there and what excites you about working there?
Yeah, you're gonna see a smile come through with everything I say here, but yeah, New Relic is about observability software for enterprises, and what that means generically is that there are a variety of processes that are happening, and I'll break this down to a simple level that we all can relate to, but let's assume something is going wrong with your computer, right? I'm just talking about a personal level here. Something's going wrong with your computer. You call Apple. Apple's, oh, it's not us. That's got to be your internet provider. You call your internet, oh, that can't be us. That's got to be Verizon or something else, right? It's not us. It's got to be something else.
Corporate salute. Yeah.
Right, exactly. You don't know what it is, and everybody's telling you it's somebody else. And you're like, meanwhile, my problem hasn't gotten fixed. So corporately, if you think about enterprises, they have cloud solutions. They have servers on-prem. They've got a variety of apps. They've got a variety of processes that are happening. Our software sits on top of all of that essentially and monitors everything that's happening so that if anything has gone wrong in your network, in your whole infrastructure, we're able to point that out to you and really make getting to that root cause very, very fast. So it's one of the most important cloud technologies that companies add to their stack. So it's sort of like you pick your cloud provider and then you have to pick your observability platform. Otherwise, nothing seems to work. So we're at the center of all that.
Nice. And what do you love about working with your team?
I mean, I've got a great team, and that makes all the difference. I've got a fantastic leadership team, um, which sets great vision and has their finger, most importantly, on the pulse of what the market needs and where the market is going. Um, and so having that alignment is critical, but also it's a product that the world needs. And when you're selling something that you believe in and that once it's sold, that's when you're happiest, right? Because you're like, okay, now they're going to see the value of this. That's the Shangri-La versus, oh, I sold this and God, I hope they don't call me. Please don't call me. Right. I don't know if this is going to work. Don't call me. Um, so yeah, it's been a great ride there.
Awesome. At On this podcast, we bring guests in who care about coaching and developing people, improving people's skill sets, helping people with their careers. So one of the questions I like to ask is about coaching, because what I found is that people who are good coaches and care about that typically have had that behavior modeled for them somewhere along the way. And in your life, in your career, Ed, who's someone who's coaching has had a positive impact on you and kind of how you approach things as a leader today, even if that coaching wasn't really exciting to receive at that time?
You know, I think back to, again, one of my first manager at the Wall Street Journal. I'll give his name a little shout out here, but his name is Steve Patrizzi, um, and an absolutely phenomenal leader in for two things that he did. Number one is he demonstrated the right way to do things, right, and not just demonstrated how it's done, but why it's done that way. So great explanations, and so you can really tie into the mentality and the understanding of what you're trying to and why this is important to do that way. But secondly, he did something for me that I've done for others now that I think was really incredible, which is at the time I was relatively young in my sales career and I wanted to move up. And he recognized that and came time for reviews and different things. And he said, look, you have a couple of choices here. Number one, I can evaluate you based on the work you're doing as an AE at this company. And I can give you that feedback and say, hey, as an AE, you're doing great. No problem. Or I can evaluate you as a person who wants to take on that next step and become a leader and a leader's leader and all of those things and say what you're doing as a rep, that's not good enough to get you to these next levels. So do you want to be judged as a rep or do you want to be judged as, a level or two up from that? And I said, well, of course, judge me more harshly. And it doesn't feel good sometimes to get that negative. This note was too long. This you should have handled a different way. This was not the correct way. You needed to build bridges with this group with internally instead of really pushing back as hard. Like those are the kinds of feedback that he gave. And it's been, something I've offered to others because when you opt into the feedback, it's received a lot better. And so I thank him for doing that for me. And I'm glad I've been able to do it for some others.
And what I really love about that is that also leads into not just that annual performance review that a lot of people dread, but it actually leads into, okay, if I'm going to coach you and judge you on a level up or so, Ed, and that means I have to put a plan in place with you to put you in a position where you're doing things as an AE that, you know, that like a day in the life of a manager type of thing that you wouldn't normally do. I have to give you, if I'm your boss, I have to give you leadership responsibility. I have to let you run a project with a group of people, right? Otherwise, it's hard to judge an AE on in a leadership type of role, right? So there needs to be some semblance of planning and premeditation that is actually helpful, and a lot of times absent in the development of people's skills. Would you agree with that?
I would, but I don't think it has to be that formalized in the sense that, as a manager, your people are coming to you all day long with questions, right? And it's sort of turning that back and saying, how would you answer that question if you were in my role, right? And helping them find their own solutions to things and things that are, the way the manager is going to evaluate it. I get that this client wants a 20% discount. How should we answer that? Don't just bring me the fact that they want 20% off. Okay, who doesn't? What is it? How should we respond as a business? And once they are in line with your thinking of, okay, here's how as a manager I should respond to that. Here's what I should bring back to the rep who just told me that. Now you are more on the path toward being that leader. So it's helping you answer your own questions, I think, is a big part of that.
Huge. Yeah. So do you find when someone comes and says, "Hey boss, I need some help with this situation. What do you think I should do?" And you flip that and you reverse it and you say, "Hey, listen, you're really smart. You put a lot of work into this. What do you think you should do?" Do you find that most people intuitively know the answer? They have the answer. It just they need to be confident to express it.
Yes, if they have been shown the right way to do it at first. So I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to lay out the vision, lay out the strategy, and show some examples of. I don't tell me that this is the right, you know, data visualization for this or the right slide deck or the right story unless I've demonstrated, like, here's what I think is a great story. Do we agree? Yes, no. Okay. So now it comes time to the next one. Now it's in your hands to create something that looks similar to what we did or tell a story and, conveying a similar message. I think it's unfair for managers to put that on people before they've demonstrated it, or it's something that the manager won't or isn't able to do. That's when it becomes an unfair ask. So yes, once they've been shown, then I think it's absolutely exactly what you're saying. Hey, you're really smart. You know what to do here. What would you, if you were me, what advice would you give?
Nice. And so on that theme of coaching, who's who's a coach that you admire? There's somebody in the public eye. Who's the coach that you admire, and what attributes do you admire about that particular coach?
That's a great question. I think Steve Kerr of the Warriors is probably the best example of a great coach because yes, he knows the X's and O's. Um, yes, he's been a player, so he understands the game from that perspective as well. But the thing I respect most about him is that he ties his efforts in coaching to a larger sort of world message. He's aware of what's happening politically. He's aware of what's happening socially, and he's not afraid to comment about those things. To say that yes, we're basketball players and we're a great diversion for what's happening in in the world here, but I also think it's important that we talk about it. And so I love the fact that he's not afraid to do that and offer that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. Super successful coach. I didn't like the way he treated my guy Jason Tatum in the Olympics as a Boston guy, but we'll leave topic for another day. Ed, as we close out here, what advice, if any, what would you give somebody who's brand new into management or thinks that they want to go into sales management?
The first thing is I would encourage you to read a lot of books that are not specifically sales books. That I'm going to call them sales adjacent. Um, they are things like Simon Sinek Start with Why and Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, and it's books like the Michael Lewis series of Moneyball and all of these things that are like these are so interesting to start thinking about things in a different way, right? That is one thing that I would highly encourage. Um, and the other thing is to ask yourself if you really want to be in management. It very often if you're a great seller, you're going to make a little bit more money than you do in management, and you're not going to take on everybody else's challenges. So make sure solving problems is at the core of what you want to do. Um, because if it is, then management is the place for you. But if it's not, then it, it it's okay that not everybody talking about Steve Kerr, not every player or even great player makes a great coach. Some are just fantastic players, and there's nothing wrong with that. And to be satisfied that you know again, great salespeople are achievement oriented, and we set this up as though it's a ladder where if you're great at sales, then you have to go into management. If you're great at management, then you have to go be a VP. If you're VP, then you have to go be a CRO. Like everybody brings that out, but sometimes being great is just taking on more territory, being better, taking on bigger deals, and that's the hierarchy you can follow too if that's your path.
Yeah, well said. Last question for me: if you had to give a TED talk tomorrow on any topic related to coaching and leadership, and sales, what would the topic be and why?
Yeah, I think my topic would be around the importance of communication. And I'm a little bit biased here. I'm going to tell you because my wife leads the education initiatives for Grammarly, which is an AI writing tool. But the amount of things that I see with grammatical errors in them is astounding, and it is infuriating to me as a leader. There are things we can't control, and there are things we can. And the importance of communicating clearly, communicating with brevity, especially in the written form, communicating in a way that is visually appealing. All of those things make a massive difference, especially when you are remote. When you have that, when you're sitting next to somebody in a room and they can feel the vibe, the energy, maybe what's on the page is not quite as important, but when you have that screen between you, communicating clearly is an absolute must.
Yeah, well said. And it really is a lost art sometimes that needs to be brought back. And you have a unique perspective, like you said, with your wife and Grammarly, but so huge. And by the way, great use case for AI, right?
There's nothing more important right now because again, even I see senior level communication from different companies going out with grammatical errors. And I don't know how that happens, right? We have all the tools at our disposal in the world. To me, it's like, let's make sure we're taking advantage of those.
Makes sense. And I think that's a really solid place to leave it, Ed. Um, we covered a lot of ground. We talked about, the importance of communicating clearly, the importance of reading sales adjacent books. We talked about how people live at work and the importance of avoiding burnout, how we have to earn our way higher in the organization. So we covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate the time that you spent with me today.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been great to chat with you.
And so again, thanks again, Ed. And for everybody out there watching and listening, thanks for doing that. We value your input. If you like what we're doing, let us know that. Let us know what you like. Most importantly, let us know what you'd like to see more of. We want to bring guests that are interesting, that provide tips that are actionable, that help make what you do not only better, but a little bit easier, a little bit more enjoyable, and with a little bit less stress. So I hope you took a bunch of nuggets from today's conversation. And until next time, coach them if you want to keep them. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's COACHEM.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachEmNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.